Okay, here we are, Endangered, Part 6, Chapter 26. This is the last chapter in Part 6. Early one morning, I took Otto and my mother and Clement and retraced the path I'd taken after leaving. I didn't have much optimism that Anastasia and the rest were still alive, but I'd hoped to find a clue as to what might have happened to them. Getting to the Manic Fields was a lot easier this time, since it was safe to take the road. I was unfamiliar with this way, though, and overshot, realizing I had gone too far only when we unexpectedly came across the peeling plywood sign that read Sitta. I could sense the old house was empty long before it came into view. Heavily so, some stillness or full. Deep greenery had grown over the entrance, and ant columns crisscrossed the walk. The front door groaned and tilted free in my hands. Inside, everything was gone. Not only the teacher and the boys, also missing were the furniture and fixtures, and there was long winding gashes puckering up the walls where someone had ripped out the wiring. Upstairs was much the same. The room I'd stayed in was stripped clean. In the boys' room, all that remained were the bolts that had attached the bunk beds to the wall. I guess that wood had built someone a cooking fire. I pondered what had happened. The possibilities were wonderful and terrible. Maybe the teacher had gotten the boys together and escaped. Maybe soldiers had come and recruited the whole bunch. Maybe tearful families had come with open arms to collect their children. Maybe the water had gotten contaminated and cholera had done everyone in. Wild animals dragging away the bodies. I would never find out. It was with heavy footsteps that I continued on my way, my mother and Clement allowing me a respectful silence. The abandoned village wasn't too far off and already showed signs of rebuilding. 2 old women were at work with one of the burned-away roofs, beating thatch against the earth to clear it of bugs before twining it to roof timbers. We greeted them as we passed, and they briefly acknowledged us before returning to their task. One of them gave Otto a long, puzzled look that was hard for me to interpret. I had asked her if she'd seen any apes like Otto nearby, and she shook her head. Once, on the far side, we patrolled along the jungle line, peering into the vegetation. Excited by this new game, Otto took to the trees, following me from up above. There was no sign of Mushy, Anastasia, Iqua, or Songololo. We continued our investigating, delving deeper into the growth. It was late afternoon, around the time the bonobos would have been eating their fruit lunch back in the sanctuary, when I first heard the high-pitched call. Otto cried back exuberantly, bounding down from the tree and climbing up me to straddle my head, a foot on each of my shoulders, as he waved his arms in excitement, slapping a hand over my eyes whenever he lost balance. Calls answered Otto's, followed by frantic shrieks and clashing sounds from deep in the trees. Clement fled, taking shelter behind the wall of a wrecked hut, but Otto and Mom and I stood ready. First to bound out of the tree line was Mushy, menacingly brandishing a tiny branch. When he saw who it was, he dropped it and rushed me, in his excitement climbing a nearby sapling and falling off, then picking himself up and racing near, only to skid in the dirt and present his back to me to groom. So I did so happily. Next out of the trees was Songololo, approaching more timidly. She was excited to see Otto, grinning broadly, but still she didn't approach near. I found out why when a few seconds later, a tiny bonobo clumsily pushed through the leaves to join her. When she saw me and Otto, she froze chirping and threw her skinny arms around Songololo's leg. Mushy threw up his arms and the little baby toddled over, climbing up his belly so she rested up near his neck. The baby stared at Otto and me with wide eyes. She was frail and wrinkly, probably no more than a few weeks old. A baby? I couldn't figure it out. Someone in the group had given birth, but Songololo was far too young to get pregnant. That left Anastasia and maybe Mushy as the father. She must have been pregnant when we fled the enclosure. They'd been surviving out here in the forest and the fields around the abandoned village, and Anastasia had given birth in the wild. But where was she, and where was old Iqua? While I stood there thinking, Songololo and Otto were already working on bringing their friendship back into full swing, shrieking and humping and wrestling. With the loud calls that Mushy and Otto had made, with the clamor that they were making now, Queen Anastasia should have come running from wherever she was to take charge of the situation, especially with her infant right here. Mushy and Songololo were paying no attention to the jungle behind them, which made me think that they weren't anticipating any more bonobos, which meant Anastasia and Ikwa were gone, probably dead. And not too long ago, at least in Anastasia's case, if the infant was alive without a nursing mother around. To make sure, I tromped through the jungle where Mushy and Songololo had emerged, the others following curiously a few paces behind. There were no signs of them. Finally seeing my mother, whom he'd known since he was a baby, when she had nursed him on formula in our backyard, Mushy rushed over. As my mom embraced him, the baby transitioned to her, gamely placing frail arms around my mom's neck. Her instant appeal for bonobos appeared to not have diminished one bit. She buried her face in the baby's hair, her expression indecipherable. We led the ape parade back to the sanctuary, reversing the course I had taken weeks ago. We passed through the sanctuary gate shortly before dark. I was there to witness Mama Marie's France cry for joy for the first time. Mushy and Songololo were installed back in their old home, only now with new baby to take care of. My mom entered the enclosure multiple times a day to feed milk to the infant. We discussed names and nothing stuck. Mom wanted Mundaka, I guess in honor of what the city had gone through, but I refused. I couldn't think of that horrible place every time I saw this sweet little bonobo. Otto and I took on the massive administrative task involved in re-establishing the sanctuary, maintaining constant phone contact with new government, rapidly changing Ministry of Environment, and keeping track of which officials to curry favor with and which to hold to the fire. Well, that was actually all me. As I made the phone calls, Otto would munch bananas and stare out the window or go outside to teach the new arrivals jungle gym techniques. He wasn't allowed near the youngest orphans since his lingering cough had returned full force. All human drugs work on bonobos, so whenever his wheezing kept him awake at night, I gave him a precious cough syrup I bought from the U.S. Embassy commissionary. One afternoon, as I sat at my mother's desk, filling out stamping paperwork, my cell phone rang. Recognizing a government number, I picked up quickly. Hello? Yes, I'm calling for Florence Bioa, please. This is her daughter, Sophie. May I ask who's calling? Oh, yes, said the female voice. This is the assistant to Monsieur Namba, social minister. I sat straight up. The social minister? Of all Congo? Yes, Mademoiselle Biot. Can I please phrase this? First, I could ask this. Do you have a truck to transport bonobos? We have a small vehicle, yes. Do you have a confiscated orphan? Let us know where you're keeping it and we can... Oh, Mademoiselle Biot, that is not quite it. Tell me, what can I do to help? Well, we have 18. It took a moment to find words. You have 18 orphans? Not exactly, you see. The new president has finally gotten around to cleaning out the former president's winter palace, but when we went to recover and renovate it, we were not able to enter. There are bonobos inside, and they do not want us to disturb them. I smiled so widely it hurt. I see. Where is the palace located? She told me. It was no more than 10 miles along the road. Is someone there now? I asked. I'm actually outside the gate right now, the assistant said. We're at a loss here, and the minister is getting angry. Please come as soon as you can. Clement drove me and my mom right there, and Otto was particularly under the weather that day, so I left him in the care of Mama Marie France, knocked out by cough syrup, snoring under a tree. We found the assistant midway down the drive, pacing next to her black SUV and wringing her hands. She led us to the palace gates. What a sight! On the other side of the elegant wrought iron entrance lay what looked like a bonobo theme park. Bonobos draped over Cupid lanterns, bonobos pooping in a bird bath, bonobos chasing one another up and down Grecian statues, leaping from the head of Aphrodite and swinging around Poseidon's trident to land in the arms of Zeus. They'd stolen clothes and furniture from the palace and strewn it on the lawn. Most were ruined, but one of the bonobos ran past wearing a dripping wet military beret over her face. There had been half the nursery here, and a handful of adults. They'd escaped the soldiers, and they were having the time of their lives. I put my arms around my mother. It seems a shame to make them leave.